Ted Cruz is not backing down from his position. You're probably not going to be surprised to find that out. If you know anything about Ted Cruz, he believes that his strategy throughout the government shutdown was the correct one, and he's obviously going to try something like that in the future. So here is him, still defiant, and he's identifying why he thinks they lost.
The deal was a terrible deal. The Washington establishment sold the American people down the river. I'm not serving in office because I desperately needed 99 new friends in the U.S. Senate. The reason this deal, the lousy deal, was reached is because, unfortunately, Senate Republicans made the choice not to support House Republicans. And I think it was unfortunate that you saw multiple members of the Senate Republicans going on television, attacking House conservatives, attacking the efforts to defund Obamacare. I would do anything, and I will continue to do anything I can, to stop the train wreck that is Obamacare. The single most damaging thing that has happened to Republicans for 2014 is all of the Senate Republicans coming out, attacking the House Republicans, attacking those pushing the effort to defund Obama.
So great little montage that JR put together. Just it's the Senate Republicans. Everybody gives him so much credit for being one of the most intelligent men in the room. Even Harry Reid in his takedown last week was saying that. But he is obviously incorrect there. I mean, the Senate Republicans could have tied themselves more fully to the House Republicans as they drifted to the bottom of the ocean. They sunk, but they chose not to.
And a lack of appreciation for precedent, because never in the history of the U.S. Senate has there been an oozing of respect for the U.S. House. It's just sort of the way the two interact. Not to say that they hate them all the time, but the same way the president, once he left the Senate, became someone who didn't like the Congress, because the Congress was his pain and the House was the pain of the Senate. It doesn't always work that way, but when it's the opposite party, it often has. What Cruz fails to recognize here is that the more he does this, the more his brand is damaged, and it's because of him. It isn't because of his colleagues in the Senate.
Well, so then it depends on whether when you question whether he's smart or not, and I think it's a totally valid conversation. He is intellectually capable, but he appears to be dumb as a board in many ways. Mm-hmm. But it depends on what you think he's trying to do. Has his brand really been diminished? Not among the people who think he's the greatest thing in the world. Then he is thinking. But I mean, he is trying to position himself clearly at this point, whether he makes another turn at some point later, to be the darling of the far right wing of the party. And he had competition for that. He wasn't the only one. Yeah. Rand Paul who was competing for much of those same people. But with a totally different tactic. Rand Paul stayed almost entirely silent.
So too did Marco
Rubio. Again, so for Cruz, and now going in here now, it doesn't matter that he's wrong. Mm-hmm. Of course he's wrong. But he thinks, no, I want to make sure they know after defeat, I'm still their guy.
Yeah, and his mission was also, what he needed to do was evangelize enough people into believing that he was right. And I think he failed miserably in doing that, because like Ben said, he still has the same group, that same constituency, which will be loyal to him to the end. Mm-hmm. But they haven't grown, and he needed to grow them rather than shrink them. And he probably turned off a lot more people that could have gotten on board with him. And the big winner here, because everyone says, "Oh, I'm tired of the winners and losers thing with every event that happens in Washington." But if you follow politics, it's an end game thing. It's a part of it, of course. It's one of the most intriguing parts of it. If you're a sports fan and you like politics, is the results. Chris Christie comes out of this smelling like a rose because he didn't have to go near it, and it shows the advantages of being a governor.
I don't think Chris Christie smells like a rose. I don't know.
That could be true. In any case, whatever Chris Christie may smell like, it's as rosy as he may have ever smelled, because he didn't have to weigh in again on this. He didn't have to come to this issue, and I think that's really important. And Rand Paul and Marco Rubio to a lesser extent.
Yeah, I think Paul was a big winner in this. I think Marco Rubio is going to get exposed as a significant lightweight, but Rand Paul, I think, but we don't know. One of those guys has a real opportunity to position themselves, assuming that you're right about Ted Cruz, and there's a lot of time to change things, and he never broadens his base. He doesn't seem like a guy who's ever going to be able to figure out how to do that.
Mm-hmm. To broaden his base.
Yeah, he looks so much like Joe McCarthy. It's freaking weird.
Yeah, it is strange.
But so assuming that he can't do that, then if you look at from a winners and losers point of view and the Republican side, it does seem like it's going to shape up into a race of, assuming Jeb Bush stays out of it, of Rand Paul or Marco Rubio. against Chris Christie.
Right, but time may dictate that somebody like Rob Portman, who's sort of an old-fashioned, boring Republican, can come up because this is all too much of a distraction.
Because Chris Christie today, very significantly, made his first news on this by saying that New Jersey he withdrew the appeal of New Jersey's ruling that same-sex marriages can go forward.
And immediately attacked for it. By the right.
Right, I'm sure he's attacked for the right. And he said, look, I disagree with the court's decision, but it's pretty obvious how they're going to rule, and that's it. We're going to enforce the law. He got out of it.
Exactly.
He got out of it.
And had Cruz done it, listen, I know what the Senate's going to do, or the Republican House done what Chris Christie did and said, listen, I know I could waste my time here and everybody's time, but it's clear what's going to happen. Or we just reopen the government. That's the example that they should have followed. It wasn't there yet to follow.
Yeah, it is interesting to see who actually tried to make waves during the shutdown and who didn't. And I agree with you, if I'm reading your analysis correctly. I think that Rand Paul, Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, if they have future ambitions, which they certainly do, most of them, they can afford to sit it out. But I don't think that Marco Rubio really could, especially as Ted Cruz started to so obviously rise.
I think he could have. I think he did. I actually think that he did a great job of it. Because what he did was he supported it tacitly, but he was not Mike Lee sitting behind him in the Senate chamber as he went off on his
Was that the one
tangent.
friend you were referring to?
Yeah, that was the one friend that he made of the 99. So I think
I
that's
think
a
that
big
Marco
difference.
Rubio. I think he did great.
I also, but just let's stay on this for 1 second. One of the other byproducts here, which is why we can't predict it, is what's going to happen to these Senate candidates who are trying to unseat vulnerable Democrats in the Senate. We look at Kay Hagan in North Carolina and Mark Pryor in Arkansas and Mark Begich in Alaska. I mean, there are others as well, open Senate seats. It hurts them, and then it hurts his party because they can't get the majority. They can't do the things which Cruz ultimately would like to see his majority do, which they would be able to if they win the Senate. And then the House that he loves so much is going to be in disarray.
Look at what Ted Cruz said. I thought the most important thing that he said, he compared the Senate GOP to an Air Force bombing, or to the Air Force bombing our own troops, which is a terrible thing to say. And then in an interview published Saturday, he urged conservatives to hold his fellow Republicans accountable for opposing the defunding campaign. So, I mean, that's saying that my Republican colleagues, I am going to be with your challengers in primaries, which we know Republicans are quite capable of doing and succeeding at. So, I mean,
He's also saying, I'm pissed we reopened the government.
But I mean, this is like, this is a guy who has no plans ever at any point to get along with his to his colleagues in the Senate.
Yeah, and to your prior point about helping out in those attempting to unseat Senate Democrats, that is assuming that he cares more about them taking over the Senate than he does about marginally improving his chances in 2016.
Well, you're
really
right,
clear.
But in order for him to have a voice and not be this outlier, listen, he can run for president. He can get a segment of the vote. He's going to do I predict that he will do surprisingly poorly in any primary. I think that he will be an outlier candidate who will have a bump in one.
I think he'll lead for a period.
I don't think he'll ever lead.
The last two elections had that.
I don't think he'll ever. I don't think Ted Cruz would ever lead. I think he's different. The last two elections had Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich
and Bachmann
and Bachmann. But Bachmann, a straw poll in Iowa that they're not taking anymore. So that's not leading the pack. That's a litmus test. That's very different.
Okay, so before we move on, so he thinks that the Senate totally should have stood behind House Republicans, and the idea there is that the House Republicans
He thinks they should have stood behind him. He just says
him specifically.
He says House Republicans because
it sounds less arrogant.
He likes to make it seem like this is not about me when it's only about him.
Exactly.
I don't know what he believes,
And
but I
they
know he
also,
wants
the
to
House
cover.
Republicans, if I were John Boehner and I were Eric Cantor and the House leader, I would be so pissed at this guy anyway.
Oh, I'm sure he is.
Even if he's supporting, because to have a senator come down and say, there's already somebody there doing that job, Ted, that's another part of it, which is mind-boggling. But listen, I love it.
Yeah, so he's saying that the House Republicans are standing up for what the Americans really want. Well, let's find out what the Americans really think about the House Republicans and the man you're referencing there, John Boehner. So right now, their preference for the GOP continuing to be the majority party in the House, 54% think it's a bad idea, 38% think it's a good idea.
It's a very strange wording for a poll.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and that's why I stumbled on it. So not what you want going into midterm elections, especially when, public policy polling, I think very reputable. They did very well in the last election, saying that more and more of these vulnerable seats could possibly go the Democrats' way, possibly enough to give them control of the House. I find that I can't imagine it, but that's what they're saying.
Look, there aren't that many seats they need to get. Like, it's possible.
Gerrymandering is just strong at this point.
Look, if there weren't gerrymandering, they'd do it.
Fewer than 15%,
they would have done it.
Fewer than 15% of House seats were decided by 10 points or less. So it's going to be very, very difficult.
Exactly.
Because there's those margins are so big to overcome them. But
right, it's happened before.
It's happened before,
and it doesn't.
And there is a throw the bums out attitude that sometimes supersedes those party splits.
Yeah, and in regard specifically to John Boehner and what Americans think about him continuing to be Speaker, 63% want him replaced as Speaker, 30% would like him to remain Speaker. I assume that they're cutting out the people who had no opinion whatsoever, because I think that would be a significant chunk of the country.
Yeah, I'm amazed.
Who don't care.
I'm amazed that, like, if that's 63, 30, and 7, I'm stunned that it's that many.
Yeah, exactly.
That there aren't 40% of people going like, I don't care. I don't know who that guy is. I don't care.
And also, I mean, I would like to see what Republicans have to say, because who do you think is going to replace John Boehner, right? It's not going to be somebody who's vastly different from John Boehner. Yeah,
Probably
and that's
not
what I mean.
gonna be
You're going to get John Boehner just in a different body. So.